Greetings, everyone. My name is Joseph Mass, and the person you see in your screen is Zach Hing. This is part two. In part one, I was addressing comments that Zach made. He was coming from the standpoint of this notion of the model minority and all of the same talking points. And it's interesting that he, goes on and just like, I call them Candace clones. Talk about come out of the past, and stop looking back. And yet his very talking points are 60 plus years old. The model minority was started in a strong sense. Some say it predates the 60s, but the model minority, with Asians as the focus, started in the 60s, and it was a ploy of the nation to undercut the civil rights movement. The idea is that if we could show the world that this community of immigrants and this minority was successful, then it would take, some of the force off of the civil rights movement and make it seem that we're just complaining and things aren't as bad as we're claiming them to be. It was a ploy then, and it's still a game and a ploy now. Many of the obstacles that were put in front of the African American community was not necessarily. I'm not saying they didn't have struggles and they didn't have discrimination and strong issues to deal with, but many of those hurdles were removed so that they could prop them up as the model minority. We're going to look at some video. In that first clip, I shared some video, and some of those same clips I'm going to share in this one as well. But what I want to do in this part two, real quickly, is to highlight. I got into a discussion, a debate, because when I listened to the comments of Zach Hing, just blaming, everything is taking no consideration of the hurdles, no consideration of the racism and the effect that it has, and even the long-term effect, and the redlining that created a lot of these impoverished neighborhoods and this is across the world. It doesn't matter when you introduce poverty. Along with it comes high crime, murder, and other issues, drug use, and so forth. And so taking no consideration of that, and certainly taking no appreciation or consideration that the civil rights movement also not only helped blacks, but Asians and all minorities have better access at the American dream. Totally taking no consideration for that, I made the comment, while we were facing water hoses, attack dogs, jail, even death, where was the Asian community in this battle? And so an individual named Hidden Thoughts weighed in. He made the comment, well, they were busy making up 0.5% of the population. He was basically arguing, well, let me give his in our exchange, and it went on for maybe a day or so or two. Basically, two claims concerning this matter. Now, he said some other things, and when time permit, I'll do some video dealing with that too. But two basic claims came out of this business. Where was the Asian community during the civil rights movement? And he made this statement. He said there were 18 million black people in the U.S. during the civil rights movement. There were 980,000 Asian / Pacific Islanders. Most of the marches took place in southern states like Alabama, where there would have been no Asian community, to take part. So on this note, on this claim, he's basically saying, it's basically, this is basically location. He's saying since there weren't any really in that area, then that explains the low to no participation. So basically, the argument here, this claim is location. Okay, I'll speak to that in a moment. So basically, he's in this particular claim, it's about the location. Now, his second claim was it's like you can't even understand just how few 0.5% is. It's less than 1%. No one's arguing that they were prevented from coming. I'm explaining to you that with so few people, far less would have been able to make these trips, to the point it would be practically zero. Now, basically the argument, location and population. Now, to address this, because see, I took issue with this because I think there's a powerful dynamic that Hidden Thoughts is completely oblivious to or overlooking. I understand numbers. I understand, it's reasonable to say if you have a larger number, then you should have larger participation. But let me show you something about that. And this is what I feel he missed. Using the same period and these same numbers. I don't think I mentioned it in this particular clip, but in one point he talks about also the Caucasian involvement, and it's true. Caucasians were involved in the civil rights movement as well as African Americans, of course. But let's look at that. At that time, and he points this out, there was 180 million Caucasians in America. That was 18 million African Americans. Now, if you notice, 180 million, 18 million, that's Caucasian race was 10 times the size of the black race during this period. 10 times. Both participated. But at every one of these major camp protests, marches, events, what have you, there was always more black than white. Everyone. Always. These major, Selma, March on Washington, Birmingham, always. Now, but yet, Caucasians are 10 times the size of African Americans. 10 times. That's a huge number, folks. But what made the difference? Certainly wasn't population. What made the difference is cause. And who identifies with the cause. Obviously, black folks identified more with the cause in this fight for civil rights than our white brothers and sisters. Even though they were 10 times our size, we identified more, and so there were always more boots on the ground worn by blacks than whites in this struggle. So 10 times the size. So in that regard, we see numbers and population really wasn't the driving dynamic. The driving dynamic was identifying with the cause. And I would think that, certainly with African Americans struggling, Asian Americans struggling, many of the same struggles, that would be more of an identifying with the cause, even more so than with our Caucasian supporters. But we see here clearly 10 times the size, yet more black than white, because the key is not just population, folks, it's identification, identifying with the cause. And so that gives us some better understanding on this numbers thing, that there's a higher principle at work here. When you identify with the cause, whether you are 10 times smaller or what have you, if you identify with the cause, you'll be present. Now, as far as location, on the actual written debate that's below this post of Zach Hing's, that's where we had this debate, the written debate. I pointed out an event called Freedom Summer. And Freedom Summer, I used that when he was talking about, well, there was no Asians too much in the South, and so that would hinder participation. Well, again, I think cause trumps everything. Cause trumps numbers, folks. 5.5 population, location. If you identify with the cause, you're going to get involved, and I'm gonna show you that in a moment. But as far as location, I pointed out Freedom Summer, and Freedom Summer was an event where individuals came from all over the country into the South to participate, just simply showing that if you identify with the cause, you'll come. Now, I'm not ignorant to the fact that if you flat broke, don't have any kind of means whatsoever, yeah, those elements can be in the equation and will be in the equation. But the reality is, and I'll say it again, when you identify with the cause, I don't care if you 0.5, if you 10 times smaller, you'll be involved. Now, location, same thing. If you identify with the cause, you'll get there. That's why most every one of these major meetings had people that came from all over the country. It wasn't just folks participated that was in the South. They came from all over the country to be a part. Now, I want to show you something here, real quick. Let's see what we can do here. I want to show you something. If I can play this. Now listen to this.
By the 1960s, the model minority myth took a darker turn. As Ellen Wu has documented, Asian American stereotypes began to be used against African American demands for social and economic justice. Stories of Asian success influenced...
Did you catch that? It said that this notion of model minority was being used against blacks, again, to try to undercut the civil rights movement. And folks, I want to suggest this is one element or one component of why I feel a lot of Asians may not have felt compelled. And I mean, it's no fault. They were being propped up. They were looking good in the media. So I'm sure the idea, we're not going to bite the hand that's feeding us. If we're looking good in the media, this is not our fight. And so, they said, we're not, if you are being propped up in the media as the model minority and saying, hey, this is how you do it when you come to America. This proves that the American dream works. This proves that the civil rights leaders are being unreasonable and so forth. Well, if you're on the positive side of that, of course you're gonna stay. You're gonna be, very, hesitant to get involved. But see, the reality is, even while this model minority notion was being sold to the world or being propagated or put out there were Asians that knew this wasn't true. There were Asians that understood this isn't reflective of us, and we're going to hear from some of them in just a moment. But let's finish this.
It's the controversial Moynihan Report, which blamed black poverty on ghetto culture. In some newspapers, opinion columnists unfairly asked if Asians could do it, why couldn't African Americans?
See the point? How we were actually being pitted against the Asian community. That was you understand? And so again, this is some of the reason why I think some were hesitant.
The Asian model minority stereotype still survives today. Only now, it's become something of a straitjacket for the community.
When I talk to non-Asian Americans, they say, well, the model minority stereotype, that's not a bad thing, right? It's really a compliment. You guys are such high achievers. Where I see it as a problem and as a negative is when the stereotype is really detrimental and really prohibitive from Asian Americans getting help, whether it's mental health care or getting involved in the political, activist arena that they really want to.
So you hear what she's saying, that this false narrative have actually hurt in many ways the Asian community, because it makes it harder for Asians who really need help to get help, because it's assumed, well, you should be on top, you should be doing well. And so it's actually has done some damage, not for everyone. Like I said, hats off. I'm not disrespecting the accomplishment of Asians, and they've worked hard, but I want them to clearly understand, and I'm clearly sending a message. You didn't just get there because you pulled yourself up by your own bootstraps, as Zach Hing wants to believe. That was help. That was help. Let me play another real quick. Now listen to this, folks. This is the appreciation that I did not hear in Zach Hing for the civil rights movement. Like he just did it all, like they just did it. But watch this.
I remember when during the civil rights era, when Martin Luther King was on the news, on TV, my father had said to me that guy Martin Luther King is going to help Chinese. I didn't quite understand what that meant.
For us to kind of see people protesting and demanding rights if they felt they were being denied justice was revelation. And it was like defying authority, which was really against Confucianism and what you were raised with as a child.
We were affected by the African American civil rights movement in a positive way, that we are the beneficiary of it, because we learned that, okay, people could march and demonstrate, but...
Right. We're the beneficiaries. See, that was the lack of respect that I did not get from Zach Hing. These individuals understood. These people here were actually students during that period of time, and they marched. Now, folks, I want you to look at this picture, and I'm getting ready to close because I'm right at 15 minutes. That's 0.5. Well, actually, about this time, this would be about 0.7%. Is point, maybe even 0.8, but it's still less than 1%. I'm showing you this because, see, when you identify with the cause, I don't care if you 0.5% of the community, of the population, I don't care where you live. Folks, during this Asian American movement launched right on the heels of the Civil Rights Movement, 1968, going into the 70s. And folks, it took place on both coasts. It wasn't just like Hidden Thoughts. Well, they all on the West. No. When this movement broke out, look at this. This looks like and you see black folks in there. Look at, because we helped in their movement. And what I'm saying here, this is 0.7. This is less than 1%. They're supposed to not be able to participate because, hey, but see, they were being pitted against us by the powers that be, saying model minority. But see, these Asians woke up. They said, wait a minute, that's not identifying. We struggling. We hurting. And they came together. Look, this is less than 1%. And they came together. And this took place, folks, on both coasts, East Coast and the West Coast. So it was some Asians. Now, yeah, maybe, in 1963, it might not have been as much. I don't know. I know that was a wave that came in around about 65, somewhere around there. But both coasts. And I argue that it's not the 0.5 and it's not the location. If you are compelled and you identify with the cause, you're going to come together. That's all I want to say on this particular video. And we're going to stop this and look forward to part 3.